Welcome to this edition of Matters, an audio publication of PSC.
Hi, everyone.
We're so thrilled that you joined us this particular issue because we've got a topic to share with you that we feel is very, very important from your development standpoint as a service provider in the beauty industry.
This topic will touch every division of the salon. The stylists, the nail technicians, any of the spa personnel, everyone will benefit from this tool.
To kind of set it up a little bit, this is a tracking tool that's used, that we've taught for years, that we believe in very strongly, that tracks key performance indicators. It tracks what we feel are the most critical things to look at individually every day as a service provider in this industry. Terry says all the time that at 5 o'clock every day you're either better or worse than you were the day before. The problem is that in our industry we are mostly a paycheck and gratuities industry, meaning that we measure good day, bad day based on our paycheck or based on the gratuities that we leave and go home with that night. And our belief is that it's so much more than that. We're a business that happens in 30 to 60 minute increments, one guest at a time. Our role is to create a repeat guest and provide a salon experience. There are numbers that will allow us to check the scoreboard and see if we've done that, rather than just go out, do the best we can, and hope for the best.
Numbers are in place to influence behavior.
Absolutely.
So we need to make changes based on what the numbers tell us. Or we continue to do the same thing if the numbers are exactly where they need to be. Very much like a professional athlete. They track everything. And if we watch a baseball game, a football game, a basketball game, or any other sport that you might be interested in, everything is about how the professional does up against the standards of the game.
I'd like you to do a quick exercise with us. So I'm going to ask you to stop the CD. And I know when people tell me that on CDs, I never stop the CD. So chances are excellent you're not going to, or you're listening to this while you're driving to work. But at least, if you're not going to stop this CD, at least think very quickly of all the things you know about the best day you've ever had behind the chair, or the best day you've ever had as an esthetician, nail technician, or spa tech. The best day. Every single element you know about that day. If you're going to go along with me here, stop the CD, and we'll come back in a minute. Okay, welcome back. I wonder how many of you wrote down the number of guests that you touched. Did you know the exact number, or do you know an approximate? Did you know how many of those guests were new compared to existing? Did you know how many of them were on the schedule already that day, prior to that day, and how many came in while the day was happening? Do you know what your overall dollar was, what your gratuities were? Do you know what your service dollar was, what your take-home dollar, meaning your retail portion of it? Do you know how many services you did that day? Do you know how many bottles of take-home product you sold that day? And do you know for every hour that you worked, how many people that you touched?
Do you also know your quality of sleep? How many hours that you slept that evening? What did you wear that day? What customers made up your best day? Were they your favorite customers? Were they new customers? Was there something exciting going on in the salon? What were the promotions or the features that were happening in the salon at this time?
Usually when we do this in a live event, there's very little that people can write down about the best day they've ever had. And what is somewhat sad about that is, and amazing, is that how are you ever going to duplicate your best day if you don't know the recipe, you don't know the ingredients that made it up? How will you know if it happens again? How can you plan to be sure that it happens again over and over and over again? Because our weeks happen by having a great day, and our months happen by having great weeks. And I'm sure you can follow it out to know what it takes to have a terrific year. But if you let it happen by accident, you're probably not going to have the year that you want to have. You're not going to have the week or the month or the day that you want to have. So what we're going to share with you is, again, this philosophy of numbers exist to influence behavior.
Let's ask some questions. We're getting ready to go into a new year because we're taping this session when? December of 2005. And how many of you have planned on what you want your income to be in 2006? And of that, how many guests is that going to mean to you?
How many guest visits?
How many guest visits? What do you have to learn and be more proficient in to pull that number off? How many hours do you need to work? How much vacation time can you have? All of that is very possible if you work backwards when you know what the specifics are on the front side. So that's what we're going to help you with today.
Okay.
When did this all come about?
Well, at this point, here's my worry. Because what Terry just shared is so foreign to the way service providers generally think. We know that from having talked to so many of you in person and over the years, the ones that we've had the privilege to coach. It's just not normal to think about. People want to say, oh, I'm in this business because I love it. I love people. I love their stories. I love doing hair. I love the creativity. I don't love the numbers. That's why I became a hairdresser, because I didn't like math class. Well, the reality of all of this is, if you're doing what you're doing strictly for love, then do it for free. If you want to be paid for it, then why not be the very, very best at it? And to be the best at it, you've got to know what the ingredients are to be the best. One of the first times that Terry, who at the time worked for Mercado, came in to do a breakfast meeting for PSC's top accounts, our distributorship's top accounts. And she got to a flip chart, and it was a Monday morning, and people had just come off a busy week, and the last day that most of the people in the audience were in a salon was on Saturday. And she turned to the chart and she said, okay, somebody tell me how many guests you saw in your salon on Saturday. And she waited, and she waited, and she waited, and not one person could come up with how many guests they touched on Saturday in their business. And she turned around and looked at me and she said, Steve, they're kidding, right? You're kidding me, right? People really know how many guests they touched on Saturday. They're just not saying. And I said, no, Terry, I really don't think they know. They did all the guests that came in. They worked hard. But they don't know how many they touched in the business. And from that point on, Terry really with me was kind of on this quest to create a tool. She made a commitment that day to create a tool that would help hairdressers and service providers measure their performance on a daily basis. You have to remember that Terry came out of an industry that ultimately measured in 15-minute increments. They measured their performance. And so to come into an industry that didn't even measure per se, or that measured only by paycheck and gratuity, it was a big culture shock to her. And yet her passion was to help grow and develop people and service providers here, just like she had in other industries. And this tool became really one of our absolute benchmark tools for making a difference in the salon industry. So we're excited to share it with you today. It covers absolutely what we feel is important. We're going to try and share it with you. We're going to try and educate you on it. We're going to try and sell you on it. It's my goal today, as somebody that's third generation in the salon industry, to really help open your eyes and have you commit. My goal at the end of this is for you to commit to using this form on a daily basis, every single day, every night before you go home.
And look forward to it and not resent it.
And have it tell you something.
Right.
Not just do it for compliance, but to have it tell you something, because your growth and your future is in this.
Okay, let's start off and just talk about it conceptually, and then we'll do some actuals. The first part, or columns A through G, is all about guest traffic and the breakdown of the guest traffic. Now, why is that important? Well, we know that 90% or more of our new customers are coming from referrals, people that have enjoyed our service, enjoyed our salon. And as a result of that, if we're doing great things and we're providing a service experience that the community can't live without, referrals should be coming in. We would be very concerned about a service provider that isn't generating referrals. As you look at column A, it's all about the guest count and how many guests did I take care of that day. Guest traffic is looked at established guests plus new should always equal total. Sometimes we could have a day where we did all established customers. We could also have a day where we've got new guests. F and G are of the new guests, how many were referrals. Now, why is that important? Some people think new and referrals is the same thing. It's not. The new guests are the ones that you've never taken care of before. And of those that are new, how many were referred to you? We have seen in cases where someone has 3 new guests today. All of them were a referral of someone else's in the salon, and you got the overflow. So actually, the salon fed you guests. You didn't bring those in on your own. And that's very important to know as you're building yourself up in this business. We've even had established hairdressers behind the chair or in the nail division or spa division for a long time that stopped bringing in referrals. Is it because they have too many customers in their base? Is it because they've cut their hours back so they have too many customers in their base and no one can get in with them now? Traffic will tell you a lot about your guest satisfaction. So knowing A through G on this is going to tell you a big story. It's also going to tell your leadership a big story about your performance as well. Steve, talk about H&I.
Okay. H&I is the rescheduling area of this tracking form. And here's what feeds into that. Guests who today, before they leave the salon, set aside time for their next appointment. So the guests that you touch, you already serviced them today. Did they set aside time for their next appointment today before they left?
So an example, if I took care of 10 guests today and not one of them rescheduled.
5-alarm fire.
Tell me why.
We'd have to talk about it. Well, because we know that if a guest reschedules today, they'll return in approximately 5.3 weeks. If they don't reschedule today, it'll be over 13 weeks before they come back. So simply, I'm going to need 2.5 to 3 times the number of guests in my base if I'm not rescheduling today.
At some point, you also begin to be known for someone that you can't get in with.
Sure.
Because there are, just like you said, you're going to need too many customers to fill up your schedule, and as a result, the customer, you're unavailable to them.
Well, also, just so that you know, for your owner standpoint, there's no owner that can schedule front desk staff for random phone calls. Every guest that leaves today without scheduling their next appointment is a guest that's going to make at least one random phone call to try and get in with you for their next service. There's no way to know when that person might call, and you put a whole salon full of those guests together, and you're going to have bottlenecks at the front desk.
Well, and that's why the front desk becomes, in some people's opinion, such a chaotic mess. And it's because they can't plan for it. And we don't want to not know what to expect up there. They are really facilitating our operations, and we want to be able to make their load lighter, not heavier, if we can at all possible. Another question that's come up in the past is, what happens if I have guests that have 4 appointments already scheduled?
That I would count that person as a rescheduled guest.
Yes.
Meaning if you've got someone that sets up appointments 4 and 5 and 6 in advance, you didn't physically reschedule them today,
but they're already
for their
expected
next
again.
one, but they're already on the schedule. That is a guest that's rescheduled. Good. Absolutely it is. But also remember, this is also one of your quality control checks. In the beginning, it's such a key for young hairdressers to use this column. And I think we've had other CDs that really cover rescheduling as well. And if you want more in-depth information on that, please feel free to go back to that issue.
But let's touch on that quickly for the new hairdressers or technicians.
The quickest way to build your business is create a salon experience and a repeat guest. One way to know if it's a repeat guest is, did they set aside time for their next appointment today before they left? It's real simple. If they don't, I'm going to take that seriously. That sends up a red flag to me that maybe I didn't do everything I could have done to exceed your expectations.
Well, also, sometimes when someone's trying to build up loyalty in the community, they'll think, look, I'm not full. I've got all this time available. They'll be able to get in. I don't have to reschedule. Reschedule's not just about being in demand and filling that time when your time becomes less available. That's not what rescheduling is about. It's to make sure that guest was satisfied and that they want to indeed return.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there's no better time than right now today while that guest is right in front of you to find out if we didn't satisfy them. The reality of why people don't reschedule is that, first of all, we haven't asked them, number one. And if we have asked them, we haven't asked them in a proper way. It's no different than the people who work in a department store who haven't learned how to ask us properly if we want their help. We know that if we approach a rack of clothing and a service provider approaches us and they say, "May I help you?" and we say, "No thanks, just looking." How can a service provider walk into that question every time, knowing the answer, knowing that we're going to say, "No thanks, just looking"? But yet I'd ask you, how many times do you ask your guest, "Do you need to reschedule? Can I book you for your next appointment?" And they say, "No, I'll just call when I have a moment," or "No, I don't know where I'll be," or "No, I don't have my schedule." If you know the answer before they say it, it means we're not asking the question well enough. So how can we change the question, or how can we change our response to their answer so that that can happen? So if a guest was to say to me, "I don't have my schedule, I'll have to call," what I would say back to them is, "Terry, it sounds like you've got a schedule that requires a great deal of you. So that I'm sure I'm here when you need me, and you always have, the added confidence that comes from looking and feeling your best, I'd like to set aside time today for your next visit. Let's go ahead and get you on the schedule, and should something come up, we can always reschedule you easier." That's fair enough, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's all about our dialogue. It's all about our intention. If our intention is to deliver extraordinary service and rescheduling their next appointment is part of that, we'll make it happen. If we think, "Oh, don't let me forget, I've got to ask every guest to reschedule, if you're just doing it for compliance, you're probably not going to get this to work properly. You've got to do it because it's the best thing to do for everybody, for your guest, for you, for your salon, and for the front desk and everybody in that environment. So that's really what rescheduling is. And we like to say at each level, someone doing hair for less than a year, I would say your target, your immediate target for rescheduling is nothing less than 50% of the guests that you reschedule. More than that, I think you've got to incrementally push yourself, stylists and service providers, to get up to ultimately about a 90 to 95% or more rescheduling rate.
You know what we find? We find people think that they schedule more often than they do.
Yeah. Well, because there's a lot of dump and dash at the front desk. There's a lot of times where a service provider brings the guest to the front desk and takes off with the next guest and leaves all that responsibility to the front desk staff. And the front desk staff, unless you tell them, "I need to see Terry again in 5 weeks," they don't know. So we've got to make sure if you're doing that there's a professional pass-off that takes place. Now, in addition, please, for the spa technicians, the massage therapists, and the estheticians, it is so critical that you hear this on rescheduling. It is the untapped gold mine in the spa side of the business. We must learn to reschedule. We must learn to sell series of appointments, to sell facials in series, to sell body treatments and massages in series, and to reschedule and always give a recommendation. Every guest, give a recommendation on when you need to see them again. Spa is still new in America.
And I think the spa technicians have to get out of the frame of mind that this is a luxury service only versus a maintenance service, just
Absolutely.
like hair. Especially in the spa, especially when our lives are this crazy. It becomes a maintenance service.
Okay, columns J, K, and L. Those are columns that you'll see if you look down at the bottom of this form. You'll see that there are asterisks. An asterisk merely says that you're going to get a real number off of some sort of a computer or off of a cash register or somewhere that collects the data. You need to put an actual number in that column. And so at the end of each day, what were the total dollars that were done by you on that particular day? That's column J. Of that, what was the service portion? And then of the total also, what was the take-home or the retail portion of the ticket? So the column K and column L should always equal column J.
Yes. And if you're saying we're not automated here, we can't get that information, well, if you use a service ticket, you do it manually.
Absolutely.
If it's important for you to know your productivity and how you can influence it, you can do it.
A couple of things you don't see here is you don't see percentages.
Right.
We purposely left percentages off of this because our industry, our profession, wants to measure things based on percentage. They want to say, what was the percentage of retail or take-home compared to service? We don't care about that. We don't want you to focus on that. We put it down strictly so that it records it in history. What are my dollars? What are my service dollars? And what are my take-home dollars? The most critical columns on this whole form are the gray shaded area that Terry's going to talk about next, which is the service commitment, columns M, N, and O.
M, N, and O reflect how much the guest enjoyed their experience at the salon. What was the dollar per guest average? That is what M represents. N is going to represent the service dollar portion of that ticket average, and O is the take-home dollar average of that ticket. O and N must always equal M. Now, why is this important? Well, so many times we've got salons or service providers that you'll talk to and say, tell me the services that you can deliver. And they'll say, well, I can cut, I can color, I can perm. A nail technician can say, well, we've got a regular manicure, we've got a spa manicure, we've got paraffin dip, we've got blah, blah, blah. You ask a spa technician, what do you do? Well, we can wax, we can body wax, we've got facials, we've got massages, we've got body treatments, blah. Great. And then I will always ask them, what is your average service dollar per guest? And usually, it's their base service. So for a nail technician, it might just be her manicure. For a hairdresser, it might just be her haircut. A spa technician, it might be primarily waxing. And what does that tell us? It tells us that we're poised and ready, and we're certified to take care of the guest in many ways, but for the most part, our conversation is about one service. So a salon might say they're a full-service salon, but their numbers indicate that they're a hair-cutting salon only. That is not the fault of the customer. That's the direct responsibility and the fault of the service provider. I ask all of you, as professionals in this industry, how many services are you enjoying on a regular basis? And if you think about that, and if you were still spending your own money and visiting a salon, what would the average ticket be if you were someone's guest? So many times you'll hear a customer say to you, oh my gosh, your hair's so beautiful. You should immediately say at that point, well, I have this done, this done, this done, this done, this done in the salon. You shouldn't live without those services either. They're wonderful. And many customers are only enjoying just a little bit of what we have to offer. And how do we know that? By column N. O represents the take-home dollars that they're enjoying, the products that we're either recommending to them. And so many people say, well, I sell a lot of retail. Well, what does a lot mean? And I'll say to you what I've said for years as a business consultant. If you don't know the number, you can't use it. If we have a full theater of products that we could offer to the customer, and our take-home dollar per guest average is $1.25, what does that tell us? Once again, I'll ask all of you, how many different products are you enjoying from the salon that you're working at currently? And how is it that we could be enjoying more than our customer enjoys? Is it because we're more educated? Is it because we have been exposed to more products? That just means we're not doing our job as a service provider. So M, N, and O is key, and everything that we teach from the platform is about our service commitment to the customer. It's a quality control check. It tells us what is. Also, if you're not held accountable for a standard of service dollar per guest and take-home dollar per guest, you're half tempted not to charge full price. There's too much discounting that's taking place in the salon industry. You might say, I do a lot of color, but your base pricing is still around your haircut price. That means you're discounting a lot or you're giving things away. This column N tells us a whole lot about your performance in the salon. Steve, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you've said it very well. It's really, we call it the most important area because, again, to me, you can capture how this business happens one guest at a time. This is for every guest you touched that day. What was the revenue? What was the dollar per guest? How much of it was service and how much of it was take home? If you know that and you know what you intended to have it be, or you know what your acceptable standard is, over time you'll know what you're capable of. And if you had a day that you were less than what you're capable of, you can automatically make adjustments tomorrow to make it better.
Oh, that's a great point. A lot of people will wait and do 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah, a lot of people will do this form in compliance rather than to have it be meaningful to you. And they'll do it sometimes 2 weeks or a month at a time.
Well, what the owner
Or
might say.
We've even heard people pay
Other
someone
people to do it.
on staff to do it for them just so that they can turn it in. Well, it loses the benefit. I think it was Michael LaBeouf who said, what gets measured gets done. What gets measured gets better. And if we're not measuring our performance on a daily basis, we're in a business that happens one guest at a time. So we set goals based on one guest at a time. We look at standards and benchmarks based on one guest at a time. And that's the value in this, especially this time of year. People are thinking about what can they do for the next year. And I've been in countless salon meetings where they have their first meeting of the year and the owner gets up there and talks about all of the things they're going to do and all of the excitement and all of the new services. And then they talk about how we're going to have a 15% increase in business. And they want every single stylist to go out and do a 15% increase. And people break the huddle and they go off and you're going to go out and do the best you can. But what is a 15% increase? On a daily basis, one guest at a time, what have you got to do in order to get a 15% increase? This particular form, if you know what's expected per guest, dollar per guest, service dollar per guest, take-home dollar per guest, if that becomes the goal, you can either hit it or miss it, one guest at a time, every day, every single guest. You can hit it or miss it. And if you miss it and don't change anything, then shame on you. If you hit it and don't reward yourself with at least a pat on the back or an attaboy, attagirl, shame on you. The greatest thing about this form is it allows you to provide appreciation and discipline for yourself on a daily, if not hourly, if not per guest basis. You can go home knowing you did a great job. You can go into the next guest knowing you've got to have a better focus than you did the guest before because you're measuring it. The number of people that we've run into over the years that are right on the brink of burnout because they have no clue how to do better, but they also have no clue how they got where they are. Mm-hmm. And those things go hand in hand. If you want to do better, you have to know how you got where you are. And this is a form that, I guess, remember we said we were going to educate partially and some of it was going to be selling? I want to sell you on the fact that there is nothing better that you could do than seek out this information, put it on the form, track it every day of every week that you work, and learn the math and total it.
Some people think because they have a computer printout, that's good enough.
Oh my gosh, rooms are full of computer printouts in businesses that no one looks at. Please understand that. Computers haven't made businesses run better. They haven't made individual performances better. They've just made information available. If people aren't looking at it, if the numbers aren't existing to influence behavior, then we're no better off than we were. We just have things more readily available to us.
We've looked at a lot of software packages.
Yes.
And there are good ones. Some are better than others. But none of them have all of this information at a glance. There's too many pages that you have to retrieve the information from.
Yes.
But I would take the 5 minutes. If I was very serious about my development and what I wanted to make next year, I would take the 5 minutes that this would take at the end of my day to look at my performance.
Absolutely. And you know what? Even if there was, I mean, I know this is going to sound crazy to everybody listening. If there was one printout that you could go to your computer and get that had all this information,
we'd still recommend that you do.
Yeah, we would still ask you to transfer it to a manual system.
So you take ownership for it.
Because when you write it down, you're aware of it and you take ownership for it.
Yep. The next column is column P. And people get confused with column P. It's the total man hours that you work that day. Now, if you were scheduled in the salon from 10 to 5, that's 7 hours. That's what you write in here. Not that I was scheduled from 10 to 5, but I only had 3 customers, so I really only worked 3 hours. No, that's not what we're saying. We want to know every hour you were available to take a guest. And if you stepped out, that was your choice. But if you would have had a guest, you wouldn't have stepped out. So this is the total man hours that you should have been able to take a guest. And you could have been completely full. Column Q is the guest per man hour ratio. how many guests do I average for every man hour that I'm there? So it's guest count divided by man hours that I worked. And that'll give me a guest per man hour ratio. Why is this important? For some reason, years ago in this industry, when I first got in it in '88, and I would ask questions, it seemed like the clock was the measuring stick for success in this business. Service personnel, and I'll use the hairdressers first as an example, were told that if you're a great cutter, you should be able to do a haircut in 30 minutes. Everything was about the clock versus the guest satisfaction. We want your story and we want your emphasis to be on your salon experience that you're providing for the customer. The dollar per guest will tell us if this is going well, or the dollar per guest average is going to tell us if we're struggling here. Some people can be pushed beyond their means when they're delivering service. It's not about the clock, it's about the guest satisfaction. So let me give you an example. Let's say Steve and I both have outstanding numbers because we're doing hair in a salon. Our haircut prices are the same. We upsell the menu a lot. So our average guest check is well above our base haircut price. Steve has been in the business a lot longer, and his pace is faster than mine. He is a 30-minute cutter, and he delivers exceptional results in 30 minutes. When I try to be a 30-minute cutter, my numbers go down, and my guest doesn't experience as much joy from our service in the salon. I'm a 45-minute cutter, and when I'm a 45-minute cutter, my stats match his. Who's the better hairdresser? Some of you listening might think it's the 30-minute cutter because he can bring in more guests. We're going to say to you that they're equally good. The 30-minute cutter and the 45-minute cutter are both contributing to the salon in a huge way because their dollar per guest indicate that the guests are going to return. They're enjoying a lot. They're rescheduling their services. But that doesn't hold true. That way of thinking isn't always the case in this business.
Okay. Another way to look at this guest per man hour ratio is it's totally different for a new person, a new service provider versus a seasoned service provider. What Terry just shared with you is the scenario for an established hairdresser or service provider that's been doing this for a long time, where you want to dictate pace and find out what is the guest per man hour ratio that you work at most efficiently, where you can create the best salon experience at the greatest dollar per guest. When you're new in the business, you haven't built a full clientele yet, so you're going to go through your first year probably with your guest per man hour ratio being less than 1, depending on the salon environment that you get into and how much is just given to you when you join. But when you incrementally, let's take a situation where I'm working 40 hours a week and I'm doing 0.5 guests per man hour. That means I saw 20 guests that week. I'm going to be working at every single thing that I can control. If my guest per man hour ratio is less than 1, it means that I need to focus on my traffic. I need to focus on getting new guests and working toward referrals. Referrals happen by creating a salon experience. A salon experience happens by measuring my service commitment to see that my dollar per guest, service dollar per guest, and take-home dollar per guest is appropriate and according to the acceptable standard. I've got to create a repeat guest and a salon experience. I've also am going to reschedule my guests so that I'm not leaving things to chance. So it's a way that for a new service provider, I can tune my attention in. If I am less than 1 on my guest per man hour ratio, I've got a lot of things that I have to focus on in order to make this work and grow appropriately. But I'd rather do that than just show up for work day after day and hope for the best.
Right. Column R represents the total number of services performed. And this goes back to what we were saying about column N, service dollar per guest average. Like I said earlier, how many services are you enjoying? We notice all the time that when we're analyzing numbers, many people are at about 1.1 services that their guests are enjoying per visit that they're in the salon. What that would mean in this example is 10 guests enjoyed 11 services, which would be 1.1. Don't you think that we should be upselling the menu more? Or are we charging for the extra services that we're doing? We know conditioning treatments are happening at the back shampoo area, but they're not being charged for. So therefore, we don't see the other add-on services that we're doing. The total number of services performed for a customer is you want to lock them into more categories. The more categories they're enjoying in the salon, the more loyalty they'll have to that salon. So this is a big deal.
I'm smiling because I just recently reviewed a salon's numbers from
Steve's smiling right now, everyone.
From a salon in Texas.
Okay.
And their service per guest ratio was so high
that you questioned it.
That I called them and said, your computer's wrong. It must be wrong. Because in all of the history, all the thousands of salons we've looked at, I've never seen one this high, so please check your computer and get back to me. And, of course, they did. And when they got back to me, I said, I'm still worried about this. Could you just give me one stylist one day so that I can compare records against records to see if this is so? And it's because we've gotten so much in the habit that 1.0 to 1.3 services to 1.5 services per guest is the norm. That when you see a salon that as a salon averages over 3 services per guest, and individual service providers that maintain a 5 services per guest, it blew me right out of the water, but in a positive way, because even I had become a little bit jaded to think that that kind of number isn't possible.
Yep.
Because the industry was performing at such a standard that said 1.3 to 1.5. Now that I know it's possible, we've got to put it out there, everybody. This salon set the pace. They're doing it consistently.
What were some of the
3.0
services,
or greater.
those 3 or 5 services the guest was enjoying?
A lot of add-on services, especially in the area of color.
Color, yes.
A lot of add-on services. A lot of the things that come off the color bar menu from Paul Mitchell, an incredible amount of those types of services. In addition, selling things off the wash house menu. In addition, making sure that those guests are involved really in the full-on menu. That's what's exciting, is that you've got 2 ways, obviously. The number of guests that come in is one thing, and then what do you do with them once they're through the door is the other.
That's the whole point.
And this particular salon is doing so much with them once they're through the door.
They're there. They're a captive audience at that point.
Yeah.
Take them away and let them enjoy it. The next column is the service per guest ratio, which you just mentioned. We didn't name it, but it was that 1.3, 1.2, and that salon going from 3.0 to 5.0, which is wonderful. Column T is the total number of products sold. How many products did you move? And that's number of units. And why is this important? Well, what happens if you had number of units? Let's say you had 10 guests and you sold 20 units. That would be 1.5. No?
2.0.
2.0?
10 guests, 20 units, 2.0.
Yes, I knew that. Okay, so it'd be 2.0 products per guest ratio. So every customer went home with 2 products, average. Some could have bought 5, some bought none, but the average was 2.0. Then we went over to column O and saw that it was $2.50 average. That means that a lot of those 20 units were 2 ounces.
Yeah, could.
Right?
Sure. Yeah, or they bought scrunchies.
Or something.
Or something that's not a whole lot of money.
That's exactly right. But it tells us something.
Sure.
So column T and U go directly with column O, just as column R and S go directly with column N.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's so important because this sheet should capture what is, and you also should be able to take what is compared to what's possible. And when you think of the number of units sold, and you think of, let's say, 10 guests that we're seeing in a day, are all of those guests, I mean, here's a trick question. How many of those guests are using hair products?
All of them.
All of them. They're just not all buying them from you. How many of them are using more than one product?
All of them.
More than just shampoo? All of them.
Probably, yes.
So what should my product per guest ratio be? What could it be? And what we see so much of the time is anywhere from 0.3 to 0.5. I mean, on the high side, 0.5, that's half a bottle a person. They're selling one bottle of shampoo to every other guest that comes through the door.
And once again, we're not doing our job, because it's our job to romance what we represent.
Exactly. And so this is a key column that says it's also a quality control check,
Yes.
which we've talked about earlier. Our people, they're here today for their haircut. They're here today for their service. But are they buying my professional recommendation? And if they are, it will show up in this column. How many bottles of product did they buy today while they were in the salon? And then work toward the goal. Okay, so we've gone through columns A through U. Who knew we could have that much fun talking about all the different things that measure a hairdresser's performance or a service provider's performance? Just a short 45 minutes ago, we were measuring only in paycheck and gratuity. Well, we've come a long way, haven't we? And yet there's still more. That's what I want to talk to you about. A couple of columns that we haven't talked about yet over on the left-hand side. The first column being the date. What we'd suggest that you do is write out your schedule in advance for the week or for the month if you know it. Write the date. If you're off on a day, clearly, I would still write all the dates in, but over in hours, if you're not working, I would just write the word off and put a line all the way through all the boxes from column A through U on days that you're off so that you don't get frustrated by writing a number in the wrong box. In addition to that, the hours column, you'll write in your hours. So, for example, let's say we were off on Monday, but Tuesday you were working 10 until 6. I would put 10 to 6. Because then when you come to column P and it says total hours, that's where I would write in 8 hours. One is your actual hours that you worked, from what hour until what hour. And then P is how many hours did that total.
All right, why is this part important? As you analyze your performance, you're going to look at things that'll stand out. Why was this such a great day? Why am I doing so well on Tuesdays? 10 to 6, I have great performance. When I work 1 to 9, my numbers are a little weaker. Or maybe you're not a morning person, and when you work 9 to 5, your numbers are weak. So the reason you want to write your hours over there is it might be another indication of something that needs to change for you. Okay.
Right.
Go ahead.
Now, you'll also see in row 8 where it says week totals actual. So those are our totals for the week. We're going to start by summing. We're going to add together. If there's an asterisk down at the bottom in the key, it means for our week total, we're going to add together everything that's in column A. Column B, we're going to add together everything that's in column B. Because, again, down at the bottom, it's asterisked. When we get to column C, we are still going to do B divided by A. If there's a formula at the bottom in the key, that formula applies all the way through, even on our weekly totals. If it's an actual, it means that when we get to our weekly totals, we're going to add each one of those together. So let's say that for some reason I worked Monday through Sunday, worked the whole week. In column D, I would add I'd add Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday together in order to come up with the weekly total for column D. That works all the way over. Again, if it's an asterisk, we're adding together. If it's a formula, we're still doing the formula that's at the bottom of the page. And I think you'll find it to be quite interesting. Now, as the month goes on, I want to say one thing, too, about months, because sometimes people get confused. They say, what if the month ends midweek? So it's the 31st on a Wednesday, and my week runs Monday through Saturday. Let the weeks be full and consistent weeks. Don't end your month in midweek. If your week is 5 days, have every week be 5 days.
Some businesses function by a month's performance. PSC is one of those. Mm-hmm. When the month is over, we end our month. The salon industry is all based on 52 weeks. So that's why you want to follow through. We're looking at 52 weeks performance.
Sure. And it just helps. When you're trying to compare your productivity week over week over week, it's just important. It's so hard when you chop up a week because the month ended and a new one began.
Right.
So that's what we'd suggest there. And in that way, it means that 13 of these pages is going to make up an entire year. Whereas if you were cutting up the weeks, it would mean more than that. So as you get to the month-to-date totals, you can go ahead and add, again, the previous week. If you're in week 1, that's probably what I would add to the left in the date column. I would say this is week 1 of the month. And when you get down to the next week, I'd say that's week 2. And so week 2, I would add week 1 and week 2 together to come up with my month-to-date totals. You'll also see in row 10, it says next week's projected total. If you're just getting started with this, it's not important that you fill anything in that area.
Yeah, don't worry about that yet.
Don't get caught up in that. Don't let that distract you. Just ignore that. Leave a space between there. So weekly totals is the most important. If you're feeling ambitious, do month-to-date totals. But don't do anything less than daily and weekly totals, okay? I really hope sincerely that we've helped you to see the areas in which your key performance will be measured, and you'll be able to grow. You'll be able to know what the ingredients are, the best day and best week you've ever had.
Well, let's talk
duplicate that.
Let's talk about the highest performance we've ever had the privilege of examining closely is a young lady that did $335,000 behind the chair. And
Yes.
looking at her numbers, she was very disciplined to the spreadsheet and what it told her.
Mm-hmm.
And so $335,000, not in Chicago, Illinois, in a big city, but not the biggest city, somewhere where you think would warrant that kind of performance.
The thing is she learned how to work smart. She worked on approximately 230 guests, the guests that were in her client base. And
she worked over 40 hours usually every week.
She did that. She worked with an assistant, which made a difference. It's funny that you would bring her up because I just recently, just when we took a lunch break, I looked at her numbers on the computer screen. And oddly enough, I looked at 6 weeks' worth of figures. And in those 6 weeks' worth of figures, she was averaging about $8,500 a week. So even higher than the number that you just mentioned, the $330,000. So her performance was astounding for where she was and for what her prices were and for how dedicated she was. But she knew her business. There was somebody who was absolutely dedicated, knew she had a finite number of hours to work in the salon, and if she was going to work, she was going to work. And she knew what her formula was.
Yes,
she knew when she had to upsell the menu. She knew exactly at what point she needed assistant help, and she worked it. And I guess that's really what we're hoping. At some point in your career, you're going to make a decision, work harder or work smarter.
And just as she learned the formula, this tool will help you learn your formula for success.
Your own formula.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening today.
Bye-bye.
Welcome back for a couple of afterthoughts. In our conversation reviewing what we shared with you today, one of the things that came up was, when do we actually fill in this sheet? And our suggestion is that we fill in this sheet at the end of each day, or as Terry refers to it, at the end of each shift that you work. That's when it's filled in. Before you go home that night, you want to know how you did compared to how you intended to do. Also, it was brought up, what was meant by at the end of each guest, you know where you're at. And what we meant by that was, if I know my goal in order to hit the numbers that I want to hit, in order to provide the service level, the salon experience level, it's important. If I know I need to do $65 per guest, $55 of it in service and $10 in take-home, and I just walked my first guest of the day up, and they got a $35 haircut and didn't buy any take-home.
You're already behind the 8 ball.
I know I'm behind the 8 ball.
Right.
I know that I didn't hit my target.
Now, you can make that up.
Today, I can even make it
right
up.
Now,
sure.
Yes.
But if I'm not checking the scoreboard, I don't know that I'm off pace, and I'm still just in the trenches doing the best I can, hoping for the best.
Right.
The magic in these forms, in these disciplines, are that you're an active participant in your day, in your week, and in your month.
Right.
And you're not surprised by the end result. The other thing is that we would always tie this form and the service commitment and a lot of the things on this form to our compensation structure in our salon if we had one. This is exactly the things that would be measured. And the magic in that is that now as you increase your prices and as you move up within our system, you know that you've earned it. You know that you've earned it because you measured it on a daily basis. It's not a surprise. It's not a, oh my God, if I raise my prices, I'm going to lose all of my guests. You know that you won't because you looked at it on a daily basis. You know where your traffic came from. You know how many of them rescheduled. You know that to the degree you deliver extraordinary service, the guest will trust you with more of their money. As you see that service commitment rise, you know you're ready for a promotion. As you see your guest per man-hour ratio where it needs to be, you know that you're ready to move forward. The number of services you're doing and the number of bottles of take-home product that you're selling. When all of those things are in place, you as a service provider are ready to move forward. And quite honestly, while we haven't talked specifically about the impact that this has on earning potential,
It's huge.
it's absolutely enormous. It's the way to grow incrementally in this business. The people who track are the highest performers in the beauty industry, period.
And there is no ceiling.
Exactly. I would much rather work in a profession where there is no limit to how well I could do versus waiting for an annual review.
I think we're good.
Thanks so much. We'll see you on the next issue.
Go get them.